The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Stephen Ball and this is Developer Direct. And it's not April 25th, I've just realised that it's actually the 23rd of May and I've not updated the date on my slides, so please excuse me for that. Today we're going to be looking at Backend as a Service and at some of the exceptionally cool components we've got that have been introduced through XE6, built on top of what we had originally in XE5. Joining me online today, as always, is John Harrison. Good morning, John.
Hey Stephen, good morning everyone.
John's going to be here to help with the Q&A as we go through, so please do post your questions as you get them. And I'll apologise right now if you can hear the bells in the background. I've actually been over doing an event in Sweden yesterday, and we're at one of our partner offices, and the bells seem to be going on for about 5 minutes now, from 11 o'clock. So, which is kind of hopefully a little bit of soothing music in the background as we go through today. So this is, let's say, session 4. We're going to be really diving in and building some clients and looking at how we can use this for backend storage up in the clouds. Next week, we're going to be moving on to app tethering. So if you've got any questions or anything that you want us to cover specifically, so in a couple of weeks' time on the app tethering one, then please do let us know. But app tethering is a great feature as well. So cloud services. Basically, you might see these referred to as mobile backend as a service. We call them backend as a service because we actually provide them for all platforms to work from. But using what's been introduced with now Parse and Kinvey, you're able to do things like push notifications, which you can use to engage your users in real time, notifying them of something that's happened. So imagine there's kind of a new event or happening, you can send a message out to all the subscribed users pretty quickly, rather than having them polling constantly. You can access data and objects stored in the cloud. So we're going to specifically spend a bit of time looking at this as we go through today. There's also user authentication, which we'll also look at as we go through. And also there's the backend services provide a way to have a common API and set of components that allow you to access into a range of different services. So there's a few different options really. Most mobile apps needs servers to store data on, or images or files. Now, there's two ways of being able to do that. Today, you can build your own data snap server, and you can implement that very nicely. The other option is to use some pre-built services that are out there that offer a lot of support around user authentication and user management and sending emails out when people have forgotten their passwords and all that kind of side of things. Or you can obviously roll your own. Now, one of the nice things about the backend services that are written, like Parse and Kinvey, is that they provide a user portal to manage your application through. And also they provide a rich range of things like analytics, so you can see specifically what APIs are being called, when they're being called, how regularly they're being called. So you can really get a better understanding about how your services are being used and abused, if necessary, by different customers, which is great. Now, to support these, there's a whole set of backend as a service components, and you'll find these in the tool palette in the IDE. Now, these are all based on the components that were introduced in XE5 for doing REST communication, and they've been basically packaged up to make it very easy to use with different providers. So the two providers that we've introduced in XE6 are Kinvey and Parse, and they're basically native providers to use the services directly. They provide direct integration to some of the common and core services that are available on those frameworks. And the way that it's all been written up with a set of interfaces in the back end allows you today, if you want to go and build your own provider that you can plug in if you wanted to use a different service, or you can go ahead and well, or basically in the future we can go ahead and just plug in additional ones as they come through. So yeah, so as I say, this session is being recorded. So if you do miss anything as we go through today, then don't worry, we can catch the replay a little bit later on. So in terms of the what's in the services, you can create, receive, update, and delete JSON objects remotely, which we'll delve into some really kind of cool classes that have been created to help us through that. There's also the ability to sign up, log in, retrieve, update, and delete users specified on the services. And we'll have a quick look at how we can manage so the data is visible to everybody, or can only be modified by people who have defined it, or is specific for each user. There's ways to upload and download files from, or streams, which you can do. We won't get time to show all of this today, but again, it's very easy with the components that are there. Query objects and users that have been pushed remotely. We'll probably actually start off by looking at some objects that we've already got populated on a remote server, so you can see how easy it is to run a query to get that data down. Now, the push notifications is quite a topic in itself, and was actually really well covered by David I on a recent webinar where he looked at this backend as a service. So the plan really today is we'll give you a link for that later on, but we won't recover that topic area, and instead we'll be showing you some of the other stuff that he didn't have a time to show fully through his session as we go through today. Okay. So let's get into the code and literally crack on. So I'm jumping into my Windows VM here, and before we kind of get into this project, I want to go build one from scratch. So we're just going to go File, New. Now we could do this on either FireMonkey or VCL. I'm just going to create a quick VCL desktop application here, and I'm going to add to my project very quickly a unit that I've already got created just because I'm lazy. So here I've got a data module that's got a Parse provider and a Kinvey provider. You can see there's no events against these components, but there are a number of properties. And while each one of these has their own specific details, like a master key, or this one's got a master secret, an API key, and so on, we can see the only code in this data module here is literally setting up the 3 properties for either Kinvey or Parse that we're required to use for our application. So what I've done here is I've literally set these as a set of constants, and then those constants are defined up here, and these are my secret keys. So you'll have to excuse me for not sharing those with you, but they provide direct access into my application, which I've set up online. So we'll come back and have a look at that in a moment, but literally that just saves me copying and pasting my secret keys in. So on the new unit here, let's just go and use unit 2, which has got my connection in it. And I can now go and start setting up to use the backend services. So let's go for the BaaS client here, and let's put a backend query component down. And with a backend query, if I just go and say, let's connect this to maybe Parse, the backend service that I want to use here will be the storage, and you can see you can connect to the different services that are provided. Now the backend class name, so you may have a T object in your application, which is, say my T object. When you store that back, you can actually define a backend class name that you want to map that to. So I've got one I know up there called customer. So I'm just going to go work with that customer backend class for my query. And then using Visual Live bindings, I can say, well, let's just go have a query string. So let's link that to a memo. And let's align that to the top. And let's just pop a splitter in here in case I need that later. And the JSON result here, let's link that to another memo and just align that to client. So finally, I need a button to be able to execute the query. So this query is going to be what I'm basically running, and then this is going to be the output. So in here, we literally just have to do one line of code, backend query dot execute, and that is it. So if we go now and run this application and execute the query, I can see that I've actually got an empty data packet returned here, which is correct because on Parse I actually haven't got any data at the moment. So let's just come back here and change this to Kinvey. And if I go and run this query on Kinvey, I can see I get specific data back. So I can see I've got Stephen, I've got John. So the two of us on the webinar here today, we've got our own customer record set up with our name and a phone number and a food property. Now, what I can do is I can do things like limit equals 1 and re-execute that, and you can see now that's only returned back one record. So you can actually define up the number of records you want to fetch through a query. You can define up the order and so on. Now this is running kind of, this query syntax here is a MongoDB style format because that's what the backend services provide and are using. So we can actually use that that language here to define out the query. Now there are slight syntax differences on the queries between Kinvey and between Parse, which is not something we can particularly help you with, but certainly there's a set of there's a basic set of what the queries are, which are standard. In terms of everything else, though, we can really make sure that it's just simple to use. So as you can see here, we run the same backend query against two completely different providers, and being able to get data returned back. So that's very much a quick overview of the backend query, and I really want to expand this and take it further. So let's just go close this project, and I want to go back to this this sample here. Now this sample is available from my blog. It's in Code Central. You can download it as it is right now. And here we're let's just go and bind visually. Now the customer control is hooked up to the backend class on my query, and here I've got the results coming out. The list here, I've just got the phone number, the name, and the ID. Now, if we go and actually have a look at the customer class that we've just seen fetched through the query, here it is defined. Now, there's no ID value on here, and that's quite important. Just want to make sure that I'm still connected okay. My Go webinar just bounced to me, so yeah, looks good. So with the customer class, no ID, but we are showing an ID on the screen. So how does that come around? In fact, let's just run this and we'll be able to show you as we do the fetch here that we do get back an ID value. So the ID is actually from a backend entity. So the entity here, this entity value is being returned. It's a T backend entity value. This has an object ID on it. Now we're able to fetch this back by using this backend object list. Now a backend object list, just like you do in generics, you define up a T object list with a type in there. So here I've got my specific type of object, but the backend object list also has a second list of objects internally, which are the entity values. Now, the entity values allow us to get a whole load of information about the object. We can get a download URL, we can get an auth token, if it's a file, there's a whole set of different things that we can query. And we just then treat the T backend object list like we would a normal T object list after we use the storage.query objects and ask for it to be returned back into a list that we've created here. And then we just say for customer in list, loop our way through. It's as simple as that. So that's pretty cool. In terms of adding an object onto the back end, then we can here just say create an object. We can again use the backend storage to ask for the storage to create an object in the remote server, passing in the instance of the object that we've created. And here we're just using that class, that backend class name of customer being passed in. But there's also an L value which you pass in here, which is a backend entity value. So it's the same object again that we get in the backend object list. And this returns back the object ID and the other details that we'd have normally if we've gone and queried for the object. Which means even if we go add one, we can then now add this object with the backend entity value to our list of objects to have a complete view of that data. Now, finally, to delete an object on the back end, we can go to the storage and tell it to go delete an object. And again, we tell it the class ID and then the ID value that's been defined to us from the backend server. So if we go ahead and let's go run this now, it's going to tell me it's already running. So let's go and add somebody else in. So let's go and add Pavel in and give him a number of 444. And if we come back and do a fetch again, we can see we've got a new object, a different ID. If we go to the delete, because in code we've put that value there for Pavel's ID, we can go delete that. We can run the fetch, and it's now disappeared. So I want to show you the back end side of this, and then we'll have a quick look at the user security setup as well. So let's jump into here. Now I've got open here Parse. In fact, if we just go straight back to the start of the website here, on here you can find out about Parse.com. You can log in, you can create an application, and then when you create an application, you give it an app name, so we'll just call it test app. And that will give you a set of keys here, that are the different keys that you use through the application. And that's all the values, that's where you get the values that we saw in that data module earlier. So I'm just going to move back to my demo Parse app. Now in here you can see a data browser, and you can see that I've got no customer objects in here at the moment. I have had some in the past, which is why the structure exists. And if we do go back to our demo application, and if we change our backend query and our backend storage to provide parse data and rerun this, and let's go and add Stephen in here. If we come back here and refresh, we can now see that the data exists on our Parse server. So Kinvey, very, very similar. Up here, when you log in, you can go to the add-ons and you can go to your data store. I've actually favorited this, so it leaves it up on the top here for me, save me having to keep going through the menu to find it. But here I can see my objects and the metadata that comes with them. I can also remove an object from here using the cross if I want to. The other thing that I can do in here is I can come and change the settings. So at the moment this is shared data. But if I say, well, let's make this private and update this, then if I'm logged in as me, I can still access into that data. But what it does mean is that when we use the login credentials, we can now make sure that the data that you fetch is private to your own user ID. So let's go and implement that now in code and use some of the user management. So I'm going to create a new page. Let's just go new page. Would help if I choose new page and not next page. And let's go and change this to be users. And on the user page, we want to have maybe a login. So let's have an edit. Let's put a couple of edits down. We'll call this one, well, I'll just pop Stephen in here for the username, and the password, I'll just put password. And let's give that a password character to make it seem like it's a bit more secure. So obviously I could go and rename these as well, which is probably sensible. So let's do this, edit user password, and edit user edit username, edit user password. And we need a button to log in, so let's go pop that down here. And this button login. And we need an event to log in, so let's put that there. But we also need to have a way to log in. So under the BaaS clients, we can use a backend user. And let's go link all these up to Kinvey, where I've set up a user already, and we just set the profiling up. So here I can say backend users1 dot users, and we can ask this to log in a user, and this takes some string values and has an output of a backend entity value, and also a JSON array. Now that's used if there's specific data about the user that goes beyond the basic values. Serena has this covered beautifully in one of her blog posts, but basically you can put JSON name values in if you want to have specific data that's stored about the user that isn't defined as part of the base user object. So I'm just going to pop in here the edit username.text and the edit user password.text, and the logged in user, and we're going to have logged in user JSON data. So I can just do Control-Shift-V to declare this, and it will pick up the correct type for me, which is quite nice. Now, once we've logged in, we're using a backend storage and a backend query here, so we need to pass that user to those components as well. So let's just go and say the backend query. There's a query API in there which has a login, so you can pass in the logged in user, and also the backend query storage that has a storage login, and again we can pass in the same object that's been returned from logging in to those components as well. So let's I'm just going to do a quick memo here just to do some output quickly of some data, because I want to show you what we're kind of getting back here. So I'm just going to do a memo1.lines.clear, and we'll do a quick if logged in user dot object ID is not equal to nothing. So if we've got a logged in user, then let's just go and do memo1.lines.add, and we'll put the logged in user. Now there's a username, if I remember rightly. Yep, username, and let's put the ID in there as well. Logged in user dot object ID. So that gives us the user ID that's logged in. Else, let's just put in login failed. Okay, so there's my code. Pretty easy to sort through. So if we go now and run the application, and let's log in. Now I've already set up on my backend services a user called Stephen. And in fact, if we come back here and let's go find the trying to remember where it is. There we are, under core users. You can see here I've been in, I've added Stephen and John with a password. And that basically, you can manage them in here manually, or you can go ahead and use the components to do it in code. So if we go ahead and let's just run another copy of this, open at the same time, maybe log in as John. We can see we get the two different IDs back. Now if I do a fetch, I've got the Stephen object back. If I do a fetch here, I've got a John object back. And that's because previously I went in and added those specific users under these accounts. So now we're actually logged in. We could actually go ahead now and maybe let's just have Stephen add Pavel, and we could put him back in. And on John's one here, we could add Craig and add him in. And now if we go and do a fetch on each of the relevant applications, we can see without having to do any extra code, we're now fetching and only seeing the data that we've populated into the system ourselves. So that's pretty cool. As I say, it's very, very easy here to persist and share these kind of these values and bits back. Now, kind of on a slight sidetrack, I just want to see if I can open up another project, because working with JSON and data around at the moment, there's been some refactoring that came in through XE6 that I want to show you very quickly, and that's around JSON. It's along the kind of same kind of feed really. It's been refactored out of the VB Express, so there's now the rest.json unit, and in there you can call tjson.object to JSON string, and basically there's a class here that you can convert objects to strings and strings back to objects quite nicely, and using that we can go ahead and see, for example, our object here converted to a JSON string packet. So this is actually used underneath the hood with those components, but it's great that you can actually access directly underneath the hood if you don't want to be going through using those components as well. It's quite nice to know that that exists down there. Okay, so we're almost at the end of our half-hour dive in. So there's online, there's BaaS references, which we'll have up and ready for you at the streaming site. They may be Tuesday that I get the complete list of those up there, but they will be up before the next session for sure. Now, the most important link, and do a print screen of this screen if you need to right now, the webinar replay for David I, where he goes into the push notifications and using the push notifications, setting it up for iOS, setting it up for Android, going through literally setting everything up from scratch, is there on the Embarcadero website. You can find it on the website through the webinars section on the events page, and looking at the webinars that are previously run, or you can visit that URL there, forums.embarcadero.com/radinaction BaaS webinar. Now, also, there's some really nice samples that come along with the product. So if you have a look in your samples directory, either under the Object Pascal or under the C++ mobile samples for cloud, you'll find there's a BaaS folder. And there's a really nice example that I actually use with the wife now for going off shopping, and she'll update the list of things that I need, and I'm constantly checking it whilst I'm down at the shop, which is kind of cool. There's also tutorials on DocWiki showing you the configuration and setup that you need to use for getting the SSL connection sorted through. Now, in terms of blog posts, Serena DuPont, who's one of the product managers on Rad Studio, she's got a category XE6 on her blog post, and there's a whole host of really good articles taking you into specific bits around the BaaS components there. And there's also one up on my blog, basically with the source code that you've just seen today available. As always, please use Twitter, email us through, or go back to watch the replays and get the resources for running through the examples and the bits that we showed today on the streaming site. Okay, so I think we'll have a quick Q&A. If there's anything anything particularly that we need to answer through.
Hey Stephen, it's John here. There's a couple that came through, so about 2 or 3 that if you could maybe have a quick look at, that'd be good. Do you want me to read them out, or are you okay to go and have a quick?
Go for it. Yeah.
So there's one all related to the setup of the BaaS stuff. First one is all the connections encrypted, and do you need to do anything to make that happen?
Okay, so the encryption is actually built straight in. It's a really good question. If we jump back into the code, so we'll find up here. There's the backend REST components. I'm trying to remember which one it's in now, but basically, when you delve in, it's using one of the I can't remember which one it's in now, but it basically links in the OpenSSL connectivity. So for any of the projects that you do, you push out, you need to have there's 2 libraries that you need to deploy with the project. And basically, if you just put them in the application folder, the linker can find them if you're compiling a mobile application, or you just need to make sure they're on the path when you deploy out a desktop application. And then it takes care of doing all the OpenSSL stuff for you. That's all just built into the components, which is really nice.
Okay, thanks for that. The other one was regarding, I guess, really a bit more about the pricing and billing model. It's basically saying, if I make an application or a program for others to use with their BaaS account,
Yeah.
how easy is it to change the connection? I guess the connection properties really, so it goes back to their account and gets billed that way.
Yeah, so
Or is that kind of...
it's 3 settings there, isn't it? On each, as we saw at the start, for Parse or Kinvey, when you create an application online, you then get 3 lines. So if you wanted to go and create individual accounts for every customer, you could do that. You just need to make sure that you've got settings in your application saying which account they need to go and use. If you're going to be doing billing for individual users that are running through the same application pool, then typically Parse and Kinvey provides some pretty generous capabilities. I mean, it's like 1 million free. Let's jump back into the.
Yeah, I think I did send around the link to the Kinvey pricing model where it does show that you can get a free one with a number of free notifications and so on, and the different
so
chargeable
I know the
options.
Parse one's straight on the homepage here. So in terms of 30 requests a second, 20 gigabytes of storage, 1 million unique push recipients, and the analytics are free. So there's a big chunk of stuff there for free. If you want to be using more than that, then you can just upgrade it and see, what you pay for the additional parts. And Kinvey, the pricing model again is online, I believe, for them.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
Okay, that's cool. I think just one or two more really quickly before we finish off. I guess just in a couple of lines, what's the advantage of the BaaS services stuff compared to kind of the previous Amazon and Azure integration that we had?
Um, well, I think we're probably actually looking in the future to getting Amazon and Azure into this model as well. Um, this is these providers are really kind of pushing out better backend services. One of the key things, obviously, with the push notifications, um, rather than having to worry about, okay, I want to send a push notification out and having to work out each device, if it's iOS or Android, then pushing it out to the correct place. They've just taken care of all of that for you. So you just call a common API from your application, and then the backend services take care of the gritty work of getting the stuff out to the right places. And again, if you want to see those push notification stuff going through, then that's great, and you can see that in David I's webinar on the screen there.
Okay, I think the final one before we finish. I think this is related to the JSON kind of factoring that you showed. Someone was just asking about, if you've got more complex objects, how would that work? Would it work in the same way?
Um, Yeah, I haven't played with massively complex objects, streaming them down, just some basic types and enums and stuff like that. So I've not hit any problems so far. So I think best thing to do is just take an object you got, have a go, and see how you get on with it. Um, it is defined, typically for objects that are going to be passed out to the back end and pulled back in. So if you've got lots of pointers to different things all around the place, then I'm not quite sure how that would work through, but. Uh, yeah, certainly if you want to convert an object to text and send it over to somebody else, even if you're with the tethering that we'll show next week, you can pass strings across through tethering. So you could have a simple object that you're working with, or even one that's a bit more complicated, and convert it to a JSON string, send that as the data packet through the tethering, and then convert that back into an object at the other end that you can then just go and bind directly to, which is kind of a pretty cool thing to be able to do.
Okay, that's great. I think that's all the questions, Stephen. So thanks very much for that.
Great. Okay, guys. Well, we'll leave you get on and enjoy the rest of your Friday. And thanks very much for the questions and joining us today. We'll see you on the 6th of June for the app tethering one. And in the meantime, happy coding. Take care.